You're watching Quorum Aletheia, a live recorded online event presented by eyeswideopenlife.org. This event, as always, is dedicated to bringing you clarity and insights about the inevitable overlap between science and mysticism, and what that means to us as we try to live an eyes wide open life. One of the greatest human beings of the 21st century was Carl Sagan. He once said, "The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both." The podcast is a public service to bring context, sanity, and applicable insights and practices to everyone, which we explore by following reason and understanding, drinking from both cups, science and spirituality. As Werner Heisenberg said, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. If anyone thinks they don't trust either mysticism or science, what they really mean is they have never seen them practiced properly. In both cases, if the way is not seeking better ways, it is not the way. Thank you so much, everyone, for making it. For me, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm speaking to you from the future. This is the first inaugural Quorum Aletheia event, and one that I hope will have many more iterations and variations. And we'll be talking about iteration and variation today. Collectively, we're going through a time of real change. It's bringing a lot of soul searching, purging, dark nights of the soul, and dark winters of the soul. And we are reaching out for meaning, all of us, for connection, for purpose. We know deep inside that this world of disconnection and dis-ease is not what we were meant for. I want to point out first and foremost that Sarah and myself, and even the moderator Luis, behind our virtual podiums, we all got here through trauma and grief. They are great teachers. And I used my grief to propel myself forward so that I became someone that I really believed in, someone who can truly lead and teach in an undistorted way. And the cost was high, but the gift has been immeasurable. And I'm very excited about this moment and what it means. It's so lovely that you could all make it here through whichever paths of meaning, of connection, and of curiosity led you here, with your open minds, and more importantly, all your open hearts. I have every intention to use this platform to grow it into a place where people can come and learn and share insights like we're going to be covering today, and messages like this of clarity and perspective, and some hope, great hope, I believe. And none of this would have any meaning, would be possible at all, without you being here, without the cups of your minds and hearts ready to toast each other in our shared space and our shared interests and be filled with understanding. So thank you very much. I want to thank my co-host, Guest Sarah Elkhaldy, whose recent influence has actually helped me change my stance towards this work, to choose to have a bit of fun with all of this along the way. The world out there is going to hell in a handbasket, and there is every reason, but still there is every reason to do this work with a smile on our heart or a smile on our face. I chose this struggle, and I can choose how much resistance I allow. Quantum consciousness, right, Sarah? And then I want to thank Luis for moderating the event and giving of his time, because instead of soaking up the event and taking it in, he's bringing his cup in an act of service to hold space for all of us. So thanks, Luis. And finally, before we begin, to help you enjoy the session and ensure you don't become stressed by detail. So there are a few busy slides, but they're necessary. This session is going to be recorded, and you can watch it all again later. And I'll add presentation notes on the video when we release it on YouTube. So with that, we're just going to get started. Luis, is there any housekeeping you want to deal with? You're on mute, bro.
Yes, that we invite questions, and you can use the chat function on here to ask questions, and there will be also at the end another moment to ask more questions. But if questions arise as the presentations are being given, feel free to write them and they'll be answered when the time is right.
Okay, so welcome to Quorum Aletheia. This got inspired by a quote that came to me: if the way is not seeking better ways, it is not the way. And what that's about is my mission to try and bring what has been badly practiced science and mispracticed mysticism back together at the table, both with that good heuristic that science has of always seeking better ways, but refreshing both of them because they both do for moderation, and all the incentives need to change again. So today I want to tell you a story, two stories actually, and then we'll share some of the technical detail and you'll understand why it's important, and then we'll get into the meat of why we got here together today. So in the beginning of the iteration of life as we get to know it, the baby is conceived and begins to grow in the womb. And the way it grows is the first cell literally divides, and then there's two cells. And then those divide, and then they become four. And that's what we call a zygote. And it keeps dividing and dividing and dividing. The cells keep dividing until this miracle of nature and life is formed. A whole human baby comes into existence. And for whatever consciousness exists at that time, it lives inside this perfectly encased bubble of existence. All its needs are taken care of. It's warm, it's sheltered, it's literally held inside the mother. But at some point in time, this little organism grows beyond the bounds of its womb. And the signal for both the mother and the individual inside the womb, the signal flips. Something in the signal says it's time to move towards what must feel like death, because the level of discomfort has grown both for the mother and for the child in the womb. And that child begins a journey towards the birth canal through chaos and trauma to come to a place that is completely new, where it for the very first time is outside of this safe shelter, and it has to begin a new iteration. This is the ancient Iranian city called Gur. And you can see there's a walled city. And at some point in time, this wall grew beyond the bounds of its boundaries. And you can see the city is also joined by the umbilical cords of the river and the road, how it was connected to other communities and how it was connected to nature. But cities and villages like this throughout history have always reached their bounds of what they can socially hold comfortably, either on the load that they put on their environment, or if it was an ant nest, then maybe sometimes the ant nest just grew to such a proportion that they started bumping up against their neighbors. And then conflict would arise. Or conflict would just arise because the people in the village had exceeded the bounds of what that village could hold. And then a schism, a split happens. And then sometimes they go their separate ways after some conflict. So what I'm trying to suggest is that splitting and separation, iteration and variation are these little building blocks that help life propel itself forward. And sometimes the discomfort, the signal of the opposite to life feels present to help beings iterate and propel themselves forward into the next version of life. Does that make sense to everyone? So when I got to thinking of this, I thought there's a few mechanics of life we want to discuss today. We've discussed iteration and variation, and there's two beautiful patterns that we both very easily recognize. The Nautilus shell shows us those little incremental iterations, and variation is this fractal tree of life where we can see the branch, the trunk going straight up and then forking at a bifurcation point. And then that pattern repeated fractally again and again and again and again and again. And those two comprise the signal of life, iteration and variation. We also all know about as above, so below. And if we take that as above, so below tree and we give it a 360 spin, we suddenly realize that at the heart is a unity. And it doesn't matter how much complexity exists at the extremity, at the center is unity. And today we're here to talk very much when we discuss quantum consciousness and the nature of reality, it becomes important to discuss this idea of being versus non-being. So let's look at what being versus non-being is. Let's take two colors, red and white. Originally, in chess and in the story of Alice in Wonderland, the two opposing colors were not red, white, and black, they were white and red. And the reason, I believe, is because the two things being represented are being and non-being. If we take a look at the little tree that we were showing variates fractally, we're moving from simplicity to complexity, and the straight branch is this moment of being. And when the bifurcation occurs, when the split occurs, the signal of non-being has to participate in the act of creation to allow being to continue and flourish, to allow being to iterate and variate. And that gives us the fractal nature of reality. When we discuss these topics we're going to be talking about today, there's two little rules we want to hold ourselves to. The one is to choose love over fear. My wife's looking after an 8-month-old and I make her review my slides. And so sometimes she walks in here and she goes, oh, this is all too much. And she said to me, look, some of this can be complex and it can chase people away. So what I thought I'd do is I'll talk to the elephant in the room, let you know that some of it is complex, but you get to choose love over fear in this moment. You get to open the aperture of your heart and go, it's going to be okay. I can ask questions, I can tag along, and there's nothing here that you can miss. We're going to record everything and we're here to answer questions. And the second thing is that there is a simplicity that exists on the far side of complexity, and that's the one we're going for. But to get there, we have to wade through a little bit of that complexity first. And it's a little metaphor for life, because against the unstoppable, relentless persistence of nature, the only thing that can withstand is the application of deliberate consciousness. So we're going to apply our consciousness deliberately here with an open heart all together, as we explore these ideas of being and non-being. Being and non-being is represented in many different religions, many different concepts. The main thing is being and non-being is not good or bad. Non-being is not evil. Non-being is just a principle that was absolutely necessary for creation. It has negative connotations to us, but the Hindus teach us a nice lesson because they regard that entire Trinity is absolutely essential for creation. Brahma was the creator of the dream, this 3D manifestation that we are experiencing. Vishnu was the preserver and Shiva was the destroyer. And they both had their points on the triangle, which made ongoing creation necessary. Being we recognize as tending to order and non-being as tending to chaos. But you cannot have creation without the element of chaos. You cannot build a new Lego pirate ship if you don't have all the Legos broken up on the floor first. Being, we also recognize as expansion, where non-being is contraction. And if we look at the other expressions of expansion and contraction, being love and fear, if the aperture of our heart and the aperture of our conscious mind is like a camera lens, expansion is the dilation that lets more consciousness in and more signal in, undistorted. And fear is the part that is restricting or contracting that lens. So what we're going to be exploring today is the idea of life with a capital L as a signal that is emanating from the unity, from the divine. So let's look at signals. What we can see here is two sine waves coinciding, and one is of being and one is of non-being. Now, when they create little packets like this, they can have an amplitude and they can have a frequency, and that constitutes the signal. And that signal is picked up by human perception, which can either be dilated open or contracted closed, and that produces distortion. Now, here is the crux of everything. If signal is energy plus message, it means that energy can carry its own kind of message. If I walk into a room and I'm bristling with spears, or my brow is furrowed and I'm presenting angry energy, you can read that energy that I'm coming with as a kind of message of my intent. But conversely, great ideas, great messages can engender new energy for movement. But the trick now, where the signal is carried by energy and it carries the message, if we are attuned through fear-based thinking, through non-being, to picking up the message, the energy of the moment, we will always be convinced that the signal that we're reading is a signal of non-being, encouraging us to more fear. But when we can apply love and consciousness, we read the energy correctly and we understand the energy signature. And therefore our distortion reduces and we are able to perceive the message more clearly. So, like I said, there's a bit of complexity that we waded through here. We understood signals having two parts, amplitude and frequency, and amplitude is the energy and frequency is the message. And they comprise the signal, and the only element left to make this whole transaction, this beautiful giving and receiving, close the loop, is human perception, which is either open to receiving the message and not picking up distortion, or it's closed or contracted. Now, this is the nature of non-being. Let's look at 3 examples. And this is where I'm going to get Sarah to start coming in. The first one is, if we can imagine these branches of being are too short, in other words, there's not enough space created for being in a cycle of being and non-being, you'll notice what happens with these little fractal branches is sooner or later they're going to clash into each other. So nature, when it's organic, not when it's synthetic, these branches are always long enough. There is always enough runway of being before it forks by non-being into its next iteration or variation. And these are a phenomenon we experience as we go through the experience of life. We don't experience it like a linear branch. We experience it as we move forward through our quantum reality. So if these branches of being are too short and the forks of non-being are too frequent, the growth stunts, and we recognize this as conflict, restricting, or choking. And this is what's happened in this little picture here. In addition, if you keep choosing the same direction, you're not reading the signal. If the forking is recursive, the result is a descending spiral where being is subsumed by non-being, which this pattern, this diagram, will play out here, and it will just go down a rabbit hole of nothing. Nature is fractal. The universe is fractal. And if our consciousness is just steered towards ever one direction, we can eventually end up in a death spiral and go nowhere. And this is why we get the manifestation of obsession and addiction. in our lives. And then something I learned from Sarah is the fact that there are intentionalities at play in our world at the moment, which are taking this, the nature, the interplay between being and non-being, and amplifying the energy or the part of the signal that is attuned for non-being. And the result is abuse and perversion of almost everything. Now, all of life is this passage from simplicity to complexity through these little principles that we learned about here, iteration and variation. And we're experiencing time as a linear flow like this. We're experiencing that way. And in one little packet is the intersecting where two arcs intersect. You are here at the end of a packet of a cycle. And that might be a day, it might be a month, a lunar month, it might be a life, it might be anything. And somebody says, look, a big change is coming. And somebody else says, no, don't worry, I've seen it happen before. It's always happened. And that is true to a point. But you'll notice sometimes being is ascendant and sometimes non-being is ascendant. And it's essential to maintain that helix shape. And the reason it goes like this is to allow us to actualize, to variate, to be led out of the safe garden of the womb, to fend for ourselves in every moment, or to be held by the signal of life. We see this everywhere. In the caduceus of Hermes' staff, in the DNA helix, and in this little diagram we've just drawn ourselves today. One incarnation is a series of many packets of interchanging little experiences. Our intention is expressed in packets. This is one packet. And that one packet contains many packets, many bifurcation points, many opportunities to express your quantum intentionality, your consciousness in a direction that you choose, following a gravity that matches your integrity and your authenticity. And for the people that's saying, you know, I've seen, don't worry, the world's always been ending, the sky's always been falling, I've seen this all before. Yes, then, and then, and then, this could have been the fall of the Roman Empire, this could have been the fall of the British Empire, this could be and the French Revolution, and so on and so on. Yes, we've seen it all before. But next minute, there's a great arc that is also coming to an end. That is the child of even yet a greater arc that is also coming to an end. And what we're experiencing at the moment is we're going through not just one barrier at the end of a packet, but a parent one and a parent one. And we're going through multiple layers of this as great cycles within cycles are all coming to an end in a coterminous way at this moment. Interestingly, if you break your life up in seasons or in years or in months or in days, at the end of every one of those packets of intentionality, you have your long-term plan and you have your short-term plan. And when you've executed as much as you can in the short term, you go like that. And then you pick up your backlog and go, right, what's on the backlog? What was the intentionality for the bigger packet of time? And so between incarnations even, this is where this wisdom arrives to us to say, actually, we had something, a bigger arc of intentionality that we set from a calmer, wiser place. And then we set our intention for this little packet of this life and we dove into it. And while we were in it, we were confused and completely sold that this is everything that there is. And then it came to an end through fear and trauma. And then we revert back to the whiteboard of intentionality for the bigger plan. And there are many larger, bigger cosmic plans that are all coming to fruition at the moment. And the people that are awakening are the ones that are attuned to the signal of that and are noticing that it's A, necessary, B, going to be bloody difficult, and C, the only way forward. And so before we get to questions and answers, I'm going to start throwing a few things at Sarah here. Sarah, a lot of the people here will be familiar with your work. What I wanted to do was talk about some of these concepts in the context of your framework. I know the language is all the same, but I know that you take a very a helicopter view over all of the arenas and the dimensions and the conscious experience. How would you wrap this up? How would you put this in a bow for folks in your own terms?
So first of all, Rocco, your presentation was poetry. Each time I was having a difficult time seeing what wanted to come through first, because there were so many things that wanted to come through first, and that's a sign of divine inspiration, and I call that poetry.
Do you want to flip back to anything?
I think I'll go in order since I'm looking at this the last one you had it on. So as you were saying, essentially over larger cycles, if you noticed within the signals, that's actually a part of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the audience, this is a part of spiral dynamics. And so spiral dynamics was coined by two, I don't know if they are biologists or scientists of some sort, but it's pretty much something we've already known in mysticism, but then they had, the beautiful and noble task of making that sound legitimate. And so there's a whole science behind it, and it's called spiral dynamics. Now, to go even further, there's waves that evolution happens in, which is why a full-blown mass awakening, if we even align with that thought form of there being one, best case scenario, full-blown mass awakening wouldn't even happen all at once. It would have to go in waves. And then I'm not even in full resonance with that timeline. That's amazing if that plays out that way. But the overarchingness of it is people who have awakened to a certain degree and continue along that path. And then they're presenting that emission. And not only that emission, they're expressing that purpose. And then that's affecting the second wave, shall we say. And then that goes on to the third wave. And so it's this beautiful orchestra of essentially one way it can be perceived from universal consciousness is almost your greatest dharma would be stepping into your next level, your next spiral dynamics of consciousness, because within that there is a secret law, shall we say, which is someone they have to come and fill that spot that you had now left occupied from going up, following the call, shall we say, toward being. And that is one of consciousness. And so by that very free will choice of going into the next signal, going into the next tier, octave, wave, now by the universal law that now shifts someone, one unit of consciousness that now all of a sudden is pulled universally, from the magnetics of them into that spot, shall we say. And so that's the very first thing that came through off of this beautiful slide that you had.
I can explain that dynamic very, very quickly. Has anybody ever seen birds in murmuration? They all move together in a thing like this, in a very undulating way. How that works is when they made the movie Gladiator, they wanted to make birds fly over the city. So they studied birds in flight, and they thought they were going to have a very difficult time programming all these CGI birds. It turns out it was actually a lot simpler than they thought, because every bird is programmed with two basic heuristics. Don't fly into the bird next to you, and don't veer too far away from the bird next to you. And of course, that's a 360 heuristic. So if one bird is moved by a wind or catches a gnat on the wing or goes towards the sun, the 10 around it will edge a little bit, because that's the nature of gravity. Gravity in our solar system works exactly the same. And if a body suddenly shoots off out into the cosmos and spins around the sun too fast and disappears, something else will be drawn into our solar system to take its place. Because gravity works that way. And that law that Sarah was talking about is pervasive to all of conscious life. Sorry, Sarah, carry on.
Perfect. Which is why, there's a schism when it comes even to consciousness. I don't really even view it as a schism. I see it more as stages of evolving. But when it comes to people going, this is how we awaken, versus other people going, no, this is how we awaken. And there's a lot, and it's literally
many paths.
You're looking at a painting and you're focusing on one corner or aspect of it. And then another's looking at one, and they might even have a broader perspective. And so I'm not even saying that all perspectives are equal, because frankly, they're just not. But that doesn't mean that the lesser perspectives are not true. They're just not encompassing as much truth as one with a broader perception. And so that's where we see a huge schism in the spiritual and in the conscious community when it comes to how we go about raising the collective consciousness. And I'm neither for being ultra passive nor ultra,
evangelical.
Thank you. I was going to say fundamentalist, and I was like, think of a better word, but evangelical. And it's because the ones that are like preaching shall we say, the evangelical energy is like, of course, I'm going to look like some sort of psyops to you. You don't understand the mechanics of the universe. You essentially are coming from an energy where we're all, it's either me yelling at someone or that's it. And that's such a limited, fear-based, if I'm being honest, viewpoint. But yeah, that just goes back into, this is the mechanics of awakening. If you know this, that doesn't mean that you are not a participant. That does not have to impact the field. You very much do. And in your own way, everyone feels called to service. I'm personally a spiritual warrior. But, not everyone needs to step into that type of energy. But what I am trying to very much make clear is the fact that your participation in the spiritual awakening is very much wanted and necessary. And yet at the same time, the world does not lie on your shoulders, and you can have fun with it.
So what Sarah was talking about there is, it's down to human perception. And the way that I describe it is, we're looking, how close are you to the screen and how large is the screen? There are screens that are too large for one human set of perceptions to take in all at once. And the best service we can do is to step back. Now, another way of stepping back is, if you look at this amplitude over here, there is a place of stillness in the middle line here. That's why stillness is valued. That's why mindfulness is valued. That's why conscious awareness is valued. Because when Plato spoke about the unmoved mover, what we're talking about is the one that set this all in motion, we call the mover, which is the progenitor of the cosmos. And then everything that's in it is moved until you're not. We're all moved to a degree by the signal of life, but we get to choose what we're moved by. And everybody else is moved by fear. The signal of fear, to sell it, there had to be some sizzle in the steak. There had to be a steak. There had to be danger. And danger and the will to survive and the lure of pleasure has been the mechanics that life has, or nature has given organisms to keep them iterating and variating and following the signal forward to life. But once we make the conscious choice, once we make this conscious choice, there is no reason that says we have to be mindlessly dragged forward. We can be pulled forward willingly. We can choose. And when we choose all the expressions of love, when we understand all those expressions of love and we choose them, there is enough mechanics in the human psyche to connect powerfully towards that and move an individual or a species or a society forward in a direction towards love. And we never, ever have to pick up this baggage again. We choose to allow, to believe in fear and danger. Now, danger does exist and the organism can die. But nature, as we've established, wants this to continue and flourish and actualize. Because as every individual packet of consciousness becomes more aware and starts witnessing, the way of doing that is by consciously processing non-being in small packets, in small bite-sized chunks, in small moments in everyday life, facing willing discomfort. The difference between an ordeal and a trial on paper is nothing. The difference is choice. You all go through adversity, but you can make it a trial if you choose your mindset, if you choose to come from love, if you choose the manner in the stance that you're going to take towards this. And by doing that, you are bringing light and love where there is shadow and darkness and disorder. You are consciously processing. We are little cogs in the wheel. We are little computers in the system. We are here potentially, if we awaken, to process packets of unconsciousness so that the whole can be dragged forward, so that more of what is divine can become manifest in the physical, packet by packet, intention by intention, blip by blip. It can only be that way. The reason chaos exists is, this is a simplistic diagram, but if you can really imagine, if there is a being or any intentionality, which these are not good words, because it's not like there's an old man with a flowing beard and lightning bolts sitting on a throne somewhere. But if there is this unity that wants to express itself in the duality, the energy that must come through must be of such high vibration that to land in the manifested, it is virtually screaming just to be able to make purchase in the dual. And that is what chaos is. Something that is moving too fast, so disordered, untethered, because that is the stuff of creation. It's the packets of what, on a different set of terminology, is non-being, coming into what is being and emanating slowly out until the waveform eventually became human beings, until parts of itself could begin to process the rest of itself. Until through being and consciousness and love, we can process the non-being and make both tangible and drive out the fear/danger component. Because it's not essential for life where we are going. It's essential for unconscious life.
Rocco, we have a question from Johan. Is non-being entering this world currently in order to force awakening, since too many people have become unconscious?
So I'll go very quickly and I'll hand it over to Sarah. So I don't think it's coming into this world to force non-being. I think an arc is coming to an end and we're being forced into a point. In other words, a concentration gradient is being experienced, a heightened level of. And this is just the natural turning of the cycle, because as Sarah says, this is spiral dynamics. And this is not a 2D thing. This is a 2D representation of a multiple dimensional spiral that's occurring. And so you must imagine from a quantum perspective, there are fields of intentionality and all the rest of it. And as they coincide like this, or as they interact with each other, as the waves or the ripples cross or interact with each other, those excitation fields, those interactions, they cause resistance and they cause their own waveform. And sometimes when you overlap two waveforms, you can double the crest and double the trough, or the crest and trough can double each other up and they can make like a lot of static. What we're experiencing is various fields interacting and intersecting, causing that disturbance that we are experiencing as non-being. Sarah.
So it's funny because non-being, one version of non-being, because there's more than one version of non-being, but one version of non-being can be looked at as the thing that always means forever to do harm and never knows that it forever is doing the ultimate good. So if I were to be so reductive as to say, God uses non-being in order to, as a hand, as an extension to go do its will in cultivating consciousness. But non-being, in the version that we're speaking about non-being in this context, doesn't know. They're not in on the joke. They don't know that they're serving a higher, more aligned purpose at the end of the day. And so non-being has manifested, and to answer your question, no, it's not specific to this, time period, but it manifests as a sculpting hand, shall we say, differently in different time periods, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's still the same energy, but it's expressing itself now in a certain way. Just kind of like, I feel really called to say that almost like back like 2000 years ago, how a being was serving at that time is not what necessarily would be the ultimate best optimal service in this time. So for instance, we have a very one-dimensional version of enlightenment because we're looking at reference points from 2000 years ago. And so do you think, I am so fine, like Jesus is my colleague. I'm so fine with Jesus, but do you think that Jesus in that context would be of the greatest service in this context? No. The greatest context that Jesus can serve would be like, wow, I'm going to have to look really normal and probably get a podcast. And then I'm going to have to get this tech equipment. And then I'm going to have to whatever and stuff like that. Like, oh man, what kind of mics? Let me go look up a video on what are the best mics. And so we have this like version that's static of how service looks like, of how being expresses itself, about how non-being expresses itself. And so even though these energies are ultimately, they're not going to express themselves the same way, even though it's the same energy within each time. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. When we reach a point of high complexity and high individuation, everybody is walking around with their own very strong predictive models. Some are partially aligned to the predictive model of society, but we also hold our own it's a time cosmically of strong individuation, strong self. With this strong self, even if a Messiah figure had to arrive, there is no way that they could appear that would satisfy 7 billion people, because we have individuated and we've transitioned and we've every single expression of sexuality, every single expression of ideology, every single expression of expectation. So that model cannot work in this paradigm. Furthermore, as I mentioned, there's these arcs, these overarching arcs that are in flux at grand scales. And at the time when Buddhism was ascendant, the overarching energy, let's say, for example, of non-being was so strong that you can't fight that tide. And so the only thing you can do is kind of help by getting out the way. And so the surrender game became the smart game in town at that time. Because to ease human suffering, the thing that is suffering is this concept of self, is the burden of choice, which is part of the gift, part of the curse. And the only way to ease your suffering in that context is to relinquish, surrender the burden of choice, surrender self, so that you can just pick up pure consciousness, pure awareness, without the sails of self to catch the wind and decide, I like this, I don't like this, I want this to end, I want this to stop, I want this to never stop. And so the Buddha came along to teach people this path of no self. But that is not what this time calls for. This time calls for the path of self. Instead of sitting with your hands upon your lap, open, passively receiving, you now sit with your hands upon your knees like a king or a queen. Because we need to be active participants in the change that happens. This is a change of conscious choice, not a change of passivity. Because to counter the level of non-being that exists now, as we are trying to pierce that birth canal of this final moment in stages and in waves, it requires the gravity of a strong self, someone to pull that intentionality forward, not someone to just throw themselves back into the release of the ocean. That path is still open, but that is the path of no self, and that is the path of surrender. And we're talking about the path of actualization, the path of self, because to help, if there is, again, Sarah and I are stuck for words, to help God manifest in his creation, in her creation, it's the bits that pull those things forward. It's not some mystical one that gets waved and it all just happens. We are the way. We are the one that is being waved. We are the baton that is being passed by nature. Right at the edge, after nature has turned all the dials, after non-being has amplified as much as it can to drive good, sane people to the edge of going, fuck that noise, I'm getting out. This cannot be it. I'm moving forward. That is the act of actualization. So there's always arcs: actualization, integration, actualization, integration, actualization, integration. We now need to integrate non-being consciously so that we can actualize collectively, so we can pull the whole murmuration of the swallows forward into a tomorrow and create a beachhead for others to now start following.
And another question for Sarah, but I feel, Rocco, you can answer it too. What are other versions of non-being? How does it
Great
manifest
question.
itself?
I never get off the hook. The other version of non-being, we can look at it as existential. What's the most generous word that wants to come through?
Chaos?
Existential confusion. The confusion aspect of non-being is very much in, for lack of a better term, nihilism. It's not the yang version that we see, the one that seeks to annihilate. It has more of a yin quality. So it has one of self-annihilation, one from, we can call confusion as to why it had to exist, which now we can create as like a character that we have sympathy for, almost in a movie, rather than looking at it as like, oh, that's the enemy in the movie, like, oh, that's the bad guy. Yeah, but even the bad guy doesn't necessarily view themselves as the bad guy, unless they're like a blatant psychopath. But pretty much it's a smaller percentage that is more aligned with their nature as a predator. So if we're looking at non-being from the yin aspect of it, shall we say, the yin aspect of it seeks self-annihilation through nihilism, through existential why. Why am I in this play in the first place? I didn't choose this play. I was thrown into being. I'm a victim of being. And that's one perception of it.
One of the ways, if we look at life, capital L life, as a signal, it's any distortion of that signal specifically which refracts and inverts the message, where the energy component is read more clearly than the message component. And so there's many messages in the signal of life. The one is iteration and variation, move forward. But non-being is the part that amplifies the sense of self. So if the energy is move forward at all costs and the focus is self, everything else is seen as quarry. And so there's many ways in which the signal can be distorted. All distortions, currently our best expression of what non-being is, are these distortions which pervert the aims of the divine and the aims of life. So anything that's tending towards fear, towards the root, towards shadow, is non-being.
Okay, and we have another question. Whether we've entered into a soul contract as individuals on this plane, or is this life just an experience with the goal of furthering creation?
Yes and no, Sarah.
I see that as looking once again as a painting from two different angles, and neither one of them are wrong. So we can, yes, to answer your question, absolutely, we can look at it as a soul contract. Since soul contracts, the nature of one, if we demystify that and just look at it in its bare bones version, a soul contract would be one of experiencing intention. So if you strip it down to its acoustics, a soul contract is, I need to experience this intent. And so experiencing that intent is, honestly, at this time period, I know that this can sound very egocentric from, Earth's perception, but it's a big deal to be here right now in this time period. And so soul contracts, like, you're not here because you were forced to. So the mechanism in order to be here would be, one way of saying it is a soul contract. No, it's like, man, I had to come to Earth right now during a massive shift. Even if somebody's not planning on being a mover or shaker, as I call them, even if they just came for the show and they're sitting there with their proverbial popcorn, they entered into this totally like not even neutral about it, like way more on the being end of the spectrum.
And Rocco, you're on mute right now.
I'm going to jump in if I may. There's something I've been working on. I'm busy writing a book at the same time. And what I'm trying to explain to people is the relationship between the birth-death cycle and quantum reality. Sarah speaks a lot about the power of choice and attunement, that we can choose and attune to quantum realities. But we have our own momentum, karmically or cosmically, and we have our own inertia, and we're on a kind of vector, but we can still influence those vectors or be influenced by the water that we're swimming in, the people that we hang around with. But if we think of each of these packets of human life as a packet of intentionality, so we're on a vector, but in between packets, when the one ends and the next one starts, the clock's zero, and what you revert back to in terms of inertia and momentum and direction is the intentionality that your higher self set at a higher cycle. And so there's a bit of redundancy built in. It's almost like saying, I'm going to go to my day at work, and then I clock out at work and come home, and then I review my day and go, okay, I got these things done. I'm meant to do this. I still need to pay this. I still need to get this done. Shit. Okay, I'm going to write a short list now for the things that I intend to do. I have to go on the bus. I have to get to work. I have to have a meeting with this dickhead. I have to do those things. And then it's as if we forget, and we're on the bus and we're late and we're going, how did I get here? This bus is so shit. I hate this meeting. These people are terrible. But in your wiser self chose this little packet of experience and choice because you had to go through this to get to the next one. It's a stepping stone. And that's the way to think of these karmic lives and contracts. On some level, there's big clauses of the contract, but there's room to swim within the fine print of these contracts. And sometimes, the contract doesn't contain everything. It contains guidelines. You kind of want to do this. But how you do this, or how many cycles you need to burn consciously because of the family you grew up in or the education you got, You are the one that needs to suffer the discomfort, because discomfort is designed to awaken us, so that you can awaken, so that you can process non-being, so that you can teach by example the people around you by how you choose your stance and move through the world. So the first thing, the biggest expression of non-being is victimhood. Victimhood. We chose this. On some level, we chose all of this. That's not to say there are real people out there who have suffered abuse that we absolutely want to stop, and we all need to link arms and make sure that immediately stops as soon as we have the power to make that happen. But we can't evangelize, we can't storm buildings, we can't do things like that. But what we can do is make ourselves agents of being and agents of power by awakening and by remembering that as soon as you change your stance, as soon as you stop being a victim, that's when you start inheriting your power. And then you realize that you've got much more freedom, as per Sarah's million downloads on YouTube can attest. You have the ability at these inflection points to go, okay, yesterday was yesterday, it's fucking done. What can I do now? What at this bifurcation point, at this fork in the road, am I going to go this way or that way? Which one am I attuning to? And of course, these things are myriad. It's not just two forks in the road. But the major intentionality, the major signboards above the forks in the road are always being and non-being, always love over fear. Those are the two compass points.
That's good. And I think a good follow-up question that we just received is whether non-being is unconscious, and further, whether non-being is unconscious, and what is the relationship between non-being and being unconscious?
So it's funny because now this goes into a book that I'm currently writing, but I'm going to give you guys a nice little master key for life as a preview. There is a conscious and an unconscious expression of non-being, and there is a conscious and an unconscious expression of being. So yes, there is an unconscious expression of non-being, to answer your question.
So I've actually been working on a system called flow dynamics, which I've shared with Luis and I've shared with Sarah. We might have a quick look at that very quickly, and then I can explain. If anyone's interested, I'll do videos or I'll have another event like this and explain the actual mechanics of how to apply consciousness and how this duality works. Is everyone interested in that?
I think so.
Okay. If we look at this waveform we've been talking about, there's 8 key parts to the anatomy of a packet. There is the intentionality, which is flow. There is the beginning, if it's flowing this way. There is the first act, which is diverging, the first intentionality. There is the peaking, which is the barrier, but it's also the limit that was reached. So remember, to reach, the act of choosing to reach, is both to aim for something beyond yourself, and the word also means to arrive there. And that's the power of intentionality, but it has limits. Your current limits are not permanent limitations. That's why you need multiple iterations, because you learn and you upgrade as you go around the spiral in spiral dynamics. And then after the peaking has occurred, there's a converging, and then the packet ends and it must give way to transition. If there is an attempt to hold on to the peaking, the peak experience, this is the act of containing. Now, there can be positive containers and negative containment. Negative containment is resistant, is blocking, is obsession. So there's positives and negatives to all of these, and there's 8 of them, and these are what form the infinity. If you take a little figure like this and you designate the top line as the the grandmother or the crone, the middle one as the mother, and the third one as the maiden or the daughter. And these things can either be switched on or off, being or non-being, in every one of these houses. It means that line can be a 2 and a 1-1, 1-2-2, 1-2-1, 2-2-1, 1-1-2, 2-1-2, 2-2-2. Flow, beginning, diverging, peaking, converging, ending, transition, and containing, which we draw a little shorthand by an I, a T, this figure, the peaking, the converging, the ending, the transition, and the containing. Now, this is where things get really, really, really interesting. Let me bring up a document and I'll quickly share with you the context of this. Every single one of these aspects of flow has a positive expression, an exalted expression, and a shadow expression. Obviously, diverging is when people are not on the same page. That's one instance of it. Yeah, I'm just drawing up a second. And we won't spend too long on this. I just want to give you an idea of how this works. So, if we take the idea of receiving and giving, everybody wants to receive. If I multiply receiving against non-being, the emergent fear is not having enough, not having. So the intention is good, receiving. Interfered with or driven by non-being, the result is obsession, not having, obsessive impulse, a movement towards. Remember, our fears are like dreams, and in the beginning, we need to decipher and interpret our fears. At first, we deciphered and interpreted our dreams, and our dreams taught us in the previous cycle when Jung and Freud were playing with the mechanics of this. But as mythology has played with the mechanics of the human psyche forever, our dreams taught us, helped us learn about our fears and our shames. Now we need to decipher the fears and discern message from energy. Because once we understand the message, we will have the essence, and then we can carry the gift of life forward without the fear or valence of non-being. We can be moving forward from love, not from fear. Nature was forced to gift us with that gift of fear. If we want to leave danger behind, we need to leave fear behind. And we need to be consciously prepared to process these signals and learn to read the energy so that we can become adept at the message, adept at reading the message, and adept at not picking up the distortion of the message which energy brings along. The part of essence that can be understood and therefore integrated. So as we are moving through this big spiral dynamic of actualization into consciousness and into actualization of the universe, we have, as a species, been attuned to another frequency, another currency of non-being, which has been fear and danger, which kept animals alive. But we are the emerging property from the end of that actualization arc, and now we need to consciously choose a new star to follow in the sky. Now, regret is real. We're the crown of creation. We are the ones our ancestors worshipped. Sarah has a beautiful quote around this. See if I can pull it up. I'm very quick with my quotes today. Sarah said, "You are who your ancestors sang about in their ceremonies. You are their revolutionary prayer. You are their sacred gift to the world." We are the result of our ancestors reaching for the divine. We are the way that they will reach there. And their ideals became our beliefs. And through that belief, we will realize this manifestation, manifest in this reality, that rung that they reached for. We are their prayers for survival and flourishing and standing in the threshold of the promised paradise. But we need to choose. Now, people that are called geniuses, that are just attuned to the message, they were able to move distortion of energy and story out the way and just go, I get it. I get it. They're not better than anyone. They're just earlier than someone else. They're just earlier. They're ahead of their time, a little or a lot. If we think of the act of fasting, staying away from food for a while, it's this process, it's a way, a constructive human way in which we can process consciously this non-being expression of not having. Danger is a feeling of not having or not being able to have tomorrow. It's what makes people fat. It's what makes people obsessive. And obsession is the low expression of having. The high expression is abundance. If you take being and you multiply it by receiving, the answer is abundance. It's constructive flow as opposed to destructive flow. The destructive flow is time. Kali. Non-being multiplied by receiving is obsession, which is this containment that we're talking about. I want flow to be contained. I want it to never stop because I don't believe that more will come. I'm not attuned to abundance. I'm attuned to having. So I'm going to keep this loop closed. Those are incidentally also the universal signals for on and off. And we need to move away from the reductionist practice of things and having and mine and possession. Because if we attune to abundance, we're just moving through this experience and everything, if the destination is experience, always lead home. We can never not have enough because abundance is simply abundant. It's the essence of abundance. It cannot run out. And if you attune to it, there is no question of whether you will have enough or not. The question of having is anathema to abundance, because that is not what the self is there to do. The self is to love, to bestow. It's not there to receive, to have. So everything, every single one of these has a positive and a negative connotation, a shadow and an exalted expression. If we understand how these things work, how these packets of intentionality, they blip like this. They're not just one steady stream, because they give us consciously opportunity. Like when anyone does an ayahuasca ceremony, you're not just straight in it. You choose to begin. You transition into that world. There is a beginning. You diverge away from 3D consciousness. You reach the peak of that higher consciousness. And slowly you stay at that peak for a while, but slowly the peak must converge. That pattern, this beautiful design, it's designed to allow us to integrate what we've just peaked, so that we can bring through that consciousness as we let it converge with our 3D consciousness, so that we can transition into our waking life and bring these lessons through. It's a key part of integration to allow things to come to an end. The death rebirth cycle happens even at these packets of intentionality, which means every single one of these little symbols that I've drawn has an expression of how non-being tries to resist flow. Either the whole of flow at the beginning, at the diverging, at the peaking, at the converging, at the ending, at the transition, or in a container. We are in a container, but our container was created from love with love, which means it innately serves being. Because I wasn't afraid about who would come, and nothing had to be perfect. And because we knew what our intention was. Sarah knew what her intention was. Luis knows what his intention is. This is a container created from non-being. One of the guests is a very close friend of mine, Simon. He has a podcast in a community called The Walled Garden. The intention of that is this fractal tree of life built inside this deliberate container. A container of love. So to answer that question, every single one of these things, these represent the 8 primal fears. The 8 primal fears are I'm scrolling through a OneNote, so bear with me.
That's beautiful, Rocco. I would also like to hear Sarah's take on embracing being and non-being consciously.
So the science behind everything he's saying is called alchemy. The main theme of alchemy is separation, unity, or it's called division, recombining. It's like the natural exhale and inhale of the universe. And so in its exalted form, how that resistance to the being of flow would express is as the necessary tension. The highest expression of tension is actually thought, but the necessary tension, or shall we say the friction, to catapult it to that next level, that next phase that Rocco had. I mean, wow, brilliant chart. This totally has I Ching vibes, by the way. The whole time I'm looking at this, I'm like, this just like.
Oh yes, 8 by 8 is 64, and you can multiply all those figures against each other and get a result. Yeah.
Love it.
We lost Sarah?
No, we're waiting for
I thought you were going to chime in with the 8 fears.
The expressions.
I'm still looking for them. I don't know. I've bamboozled.
That's okay. You can look for that, and we could take another question.
Yeah, there's another question.
Because I actually want to know what the 8 fears were that each one is represented by.
So going back to the fractal nature of reality, in a way this question pertains to that, how do you think staying stuck in a state of non-being affects the tree's structure? Like how recursion leads to spirals and the truncating branches of the tree. What is the end result of that, of being stuck, and the bigger outcome of that?
So there's legitimate phases in life where we are, until we become the alchemist, so consciousness is the transmuting factor of anything. So whether a person is stuck because they're in the death throes of some sort of physical ailment flare up, or whether it's totally, blatantly spiritual, shall we say, we can become the alchemist. And that simply means just assigning meaning, regardless of whether the non-being aspects of us are in complete, denial or exacerbation of that. So what we can do is go, okay, if I'm stuck, then how we can perceive it, even if we're in some sort of physical ailment, and that's causing a lot of the fatigue, because that's actually what I see a lot. A lot of the stuckness is not just stuckness on one plane of consciousness. It's manifesting also as, oh yeah, and I have adrenal fatigue, or oh yeah, and I have depression. There's the psycho-spiritual is. I'm surprised if a person just feels stuck on one layer of their energy field. But regardless of whether it's one layer or several layers of the energy field, how a person can choose with their own consciousness to translate this as, I'm stuck. We're not in denial of that. We're not spiritual bypassing that. However, I'm stuck, and therefore I'm going to assign a meaning to it. And assigning that meaning to it is consciously using our free will to go, I am the alchemist. And so by doing so, we now use our consciousness as the transmutating factor of the stuckness, which means the stuckness must be serving me. And the stuckness must be serving me is fill in the blank. And so how I choose to fill in that blank is the stuckness must be serving me because at a deeper level, I'm actually going through a decompression. It's manifesting as depression, but it's actually a decompression. And that's what a lot of the spiritual journey is. A lot of the spiritual journey is going, oh, wow, that took a lot of energy to process that. For every time that I come off so eloquent, I had to sleep a lot and I was confused and depressed. So it's like this baking process. And so if we're half baked, but we want to be there, we're going to have what fills in the blank, a lot of like self-blame or lack. We're going to be in lack while we're baking. We're still baking, but now we're going to experience the ride of baking as lack. But to go, okay, I'm baking, I'm half baked, or whatever that means to you.
Baked.
I'm gonna, choose to experience this as a deep level of decompression or a deep level of integration that looks on the outside like complete paralysis because of how much is going on deeper behind the scenes. Then that's one way that a person can help themselves energetically transmute the energy of stuckness and allow that stuckness to serve its higher purpose.
1 month a year, I'm hopeless. And if I delay that, it becomes 2 months a year. And if I delay that and try to push it off and keep banging on, it becomes 3 months a year. This year, it was 3 months. November, December, January, February, 4 months. And I crashed. But all of this that you saw is a result of going through that terrible crash that I had to. I absolutely had to. Now, we don't have to keep putting it off for days and days and days and days and days, or weeks or months, or a lifetime, because the reason we're putting it off is because of story. We're afraid. Story is the distortion of the message, because we're afraid that we're failing. We're afraid that we're not baked enough yet. We're afraid that we're not done or ready enough. But you don't plant seeds and then sit there with a sharp knife poking them to grow quicker. This is the point of grace. You plant the intention, and there are intentions coming to fruition in you that were planted many lives ago. And shit will just happen when shit happens. And the more you can trust in the flow of things arriving in their right time, set your intention. Your intention becomes goals. Your goals become execution. Your execution becomes harvest. Your harvest becomes depleted. You go towards death. You review. You choose. You choose where you would choose to express your energy in the next cycle, where you choose to integrate and collaborate, and where you choose to withdraw. And you get to choose those things. Now, where you set your packet markers, I set mine monthly. I follow a lunar calendar. I say the first waxing moon is my spring. I've just come out of my death where I set my intentions. I did a retro. I chose what I want to stop, what I want to start, what I want to keep, where to express my energy, where to connect and collaborate and interact, and where to withdraw. And then I start off in spring and everything's new and everything's giddy and everything's a novelty. But I'm also unsure and I tip over a lot. Lots of regressions. But by summer, full moon, I'm hitting my straps. By the end of summer, I've planted everything I'm going to plant. And if I haven't done anything, it belongs to next season. And I don't worry about it. I let it go because I know I'm part of the flow. And then in autumn, I start receiving the rewards, not just of what I've planted and worked on this month, but the fruit that is now ripening from seasons past. Now it's all bearing fruit and it gains momentum. And then I let it all go. And I die in winter at the new moon, and I become nothing. And I just grieve the things that I lost. I grieve the relationships I lost. There is a healthy way to entrain into a natural clock, the moon, the secret ruler, so that this doesn't become guesswork of how do I handle today? What do I do next? How am I supposed to do this? There's 4 weeks in a lunar month, plenty of time. There's a reason the days are named Sunday, Monday, because they each have their own prevailing energy and prevailing signature. There's a right and a better time to do all of these things. This is not woo-woo. This is prudent. This is intelligent. And entrainment is when you see fireflies in the forest, they're all doing this. But then slowly over time, they do this. And we just lack something to entrain to. And we're entrained to the story and the chaos and the mayhem of everyone else who is entrained to each other and non-being. And that's why you're getting the static on the television screen. As soon as we start deciding something bigger and steadier to entrain to and give ourselves these seasons of intentionality, now is the newness, now is the fullness, now is the harvest, now is the ending. Again and again and again and again. And the reason this has become a new problem was because societies used to follow the entrainment of their women, the menstrual cycles, the arcs of actualization and integration. This little seashell that I keep, if you think of that nautilus shell from the beginning of the slide, this little bad boy here, if we come from the middle of the shell and we go out in our monthly cycle and we reach the absolute end, we flip on the inside and we start integrating and we spiral back down into nothing. And then we pop out again, bigger and better. And so the shell grows one iteration at a time. And we can all do that. And we can stop worrying about which arc we're at. And we can stop worrying about, I'm feeling really low. Yeah, it's normal. This is good. And we're in training to a higher intelligence. And so we stop worrying whether we are good or not, whether we're doing enough or not. Just keep flowing.
Did you find the primal fears?
I did.
Let's see that.
Okay, so I'm going to have to read them to you. But the first one we mentioned about a flow, I've already told you that one. So
do you want to put the other? Sorry, do you want to put the other slide so we can see them?
Ah, yes. That's why you're moderating, Luis. So constructive flow is abundance, and destructive flow is containment, obsession. Constructive beginning is creation, which is the male member pointing into the creation. The destructive aspect of it is like a cancer. It's the beginning, the act of creation that is out of step with being. So the related fear here is the fear of disconnection, the fear of being alone. The related fear here is the fear of other. The related fear here is the fear of ego. The related fear here is the fear of conflict. The related fear here is the fear of ceasing to be, of oblivion. And the related fear here is the fear of, oblivion. And lost it. The transition is the fearing of not being free, and the containment is the negative expression, is the fear of not belonging in that containment, the fear of banishment. I forgot ending off there. The ending is obviously we fear death, the actual act of death. Not what happens afterwards by non-existing. We fear going through that experience, which means the love expression of those is connecting with genuine connection, with wanting, with welcoming, with helping, with being of value. The love expression of beginning is loving ourselves. If you truly love yourself, you will want the best for yourself, and you will look with curiosity at what is wrong rather than thinking I am wrong. Our two diseases are guilt and shame. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. And you just did the best that you had at the time, and you are what you are right now. Diverging, the love expression, is to love actualization, to love this expression of freedom and power in alignment with your purest truth, to go hunting for it and not be afraid of being wrong or diverging from the pack or diverging from what's right. Peaking is the love of collaboration, the love of doing things together, not just standing together, doing together. Community, not solidarity. We got that wrong. The love expression of converging is to love life. This is how we connect with our purpose, loving life, the signal of being mixed with the signal of divergence, the essence of diverging. These two are related. And ending is grace. Grace. It's not the love of anything. It's just grace. It's the part that you show up for and you go, you know what? It's going to be okay. I believe it's going to be okay. Give it time. Transition is to love freedom. The reason that there is sexual and gender expressions called transitioning at the moment is because the human psyche is looking for an expression of freedom wherever it can find it, on all expressions, all means of expression. And we are transitioning as a species. We're transitioning as a culture. And that's because we love freedom and we're feeling contained in this space. And the final one, the negative expression, was containing and resisting and blocking. And this is, we just love being wanted. We love belonging. We love being welcomed. We love being cherished. And if you can connect with those things, you don't need fear and you don't need danger. You don't need to be wired, attuned to the negative expressions of non-being. Now, each of these figures, you can apply binary mathematics against them. So if you're stuck in this one and you're trying to achieve this one, multiplying the two will tell you what the mother needs to be. And that's the energy that you need to bring to transmute one state into another state.
Wow.
And so I'm developing little cards, little 8 cards, and a little course on how to teach people what flow dynamics are, what the expressions of love and fear mean, how you can tell whether you're stuck in one or battling with something, and how to do the very, very simple mathematics. Different equals 2, same equals 1. So you can multiply any one of these and get to anything else. And they also have, these two are air, these two are water, these two are earth, and these two obviously are fire. The creation and the destruction. The flow of water diverging or converging, confluence. Transition and flow are air, the idea. And the earth is the limit of peaking and the holding of containing. Anyway, so there's ways to use all of these things and make less of it guesswork. And I've realized that if you really want to get ahead, you add Sarah's YouTube channel to your favorites, and then you go and match it with whatever I'm saying, and you're going to get there. Yeah.
Yes, we're nearing the end, but if everybody's okay with extending and we can address a few more questions, would that be okay?
Sarah's got a hard stop in,
Okay.
or may have already reached that hard stop.
I could do one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, in that case, well, basically, I'll go to the question I was saving for the end. Why? Somebody asked, why? What is the point of all of this? Is there a master plan? Do we each have our own journey? Why is it to achieve? What is the soul looking for to achieve? Is it balance? Is it physicality with the consciousness? What is the point of all
Innately
this?
built into the soul is striving for harmony. We could look at it from a perspective of harmony between non-being and being. It's not necessarily like the soul is saying, I need harmony between non-being and being, but striving towards harmony. And the bigger thing, the bigger context for harmony is this idea, back to non-being and being, that it exists. And existing can't be looked over. It can't be like, okay, so we exist. Existence is so fundamental to the bigger picture, whether we put that in the context of source, whether it's what I would consider a little less as expanded of a concept as universal consciousness, or even as the multiverse. The concept of existing cannot be overlooked as something that's just like a mere part of the spiritual awakening journey. Existence is the why, because the soul has that too built in within them, the harmony between these internal or external forces, because we're not all being, just like we're not all non-being. And so it's reconciling existence through this dance, shall you say. It's noticing and becoming aware of its multidimensionality. And that becoming aware of its multidimensionality is expressed as a journey of the soul. Rocco, did you want to add to that?
Yeah. The why, there is a great why, and there is your why. And your why fits within the great why, because the intention is variation and actualization. And there is no rabbit hole that you can go down for which a place wasn't provided in consciousness or in this universe for you to bring exploration and experience to. If the destination is experience, all ways lead home. And if your current experience is one of nihilism or apathy or indifference, there is something to be explored by human consciousness there. But most of the people on this call are assumedly here because there is an itch that they're waiting to scratch. There is a splinter in the mind. There is this can't be it. This can't be how we go out. What can we do? What can I do? Who am I? What is my purpose? How much of this is karma? These are complex questions, and they can have simple or complex answers, but their complexity is based on our level of distortion or our level of clarity. And I can actually, Sarah and I can actually do that. If you book time with Sarah or you book time with me, we can explore your individual questions and help you explore them and determine which questions you want to ask. And maybe if you work with me, I can help you explore the why. But I can't tell you why. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to help you how to think. And maybe you just haven't. I've got a statement around this. If you're not finding yourself pulled forward, you're just not sitting with the right questions here. And good questions are not these low-hanging fruit that you ask them, they come answered, and you're done here. Those are dead ends. There's no flow there. Good questions are the ones that automatically breed other questions. And yes, they can take you down this rabbit hole. That can happen. But you have to use the compass of the human heart. The human heart is the only compass you'll ever need. The only compass you'll ever need. And you don't feel in the heart, you feel with the heart. It's a feeling instrument. And it can feel the full spectrum of everything that's happening. And when you really inspect everything that's happening, your body, your energy signature will tell you which way it wants to move. Sarah?
That's beautifully put. That reminds me of when I did the episode of my YouTube video, Greed is Not the Problem. When I first started the channel, what ended up happening was totally not it wasn't consciously happening, but when I was writing the scripts for each episode, I got into a method acting because I was so attuned to the content. And so after I wrote Greed is Not the Problem, which is about being a non-being, I got really depressed because I had connected so directly with non-being as I was, and I got, for about a week, I was in non-being, and not in non-being like, oh my God, I'm in non-being, this is bad vibes. I was connecting with the aspect in me, and I did a fair portrayal of it. And I wasn't being so, shall we say, black and white on the black and white topic. I was speaking of non-being in a very just way, I perceive, but still, in it, I talk about how,
You
no one's
channeled it.
hands are clean. Yeah, we're not all just one thing. We have these different affinities. So we'll have an affinity for like, hey, don't harm people. Hey, did they ask for that? Wait, was that consensual to rob them or whatever it is? Like, because it's not if it's theft. That's what it's implied. So we have an affinity towards freedom, external and internal sovereignty, because you cannot have external sovereignty. You cannot have that reflection if you don't have the internal template for that, if you don't have the internal monarch, which is internal sovereignty, which is why spiritual sovereignty is so harped about in a spiritual awakening. So yeah, we have an affinity for things, but that doesn't mean that we don't contain the whole hologram, or as you said, these different complexities and variations are being drawn upon. And so I really went into the non-being aspect of myself after that video, where I was really in a state of isolation, complete. I had tuned into the aspect of me that says, there's a place for everyone else in existence, and there is not a place for me in existence. And that severity of isolation, I'm just going to say, we all have within us somewhere. I was just connecting to it in such a deep and direct way because I was open to that at that time, since I was writing the script for that. And I felt like that would be a really fun thing, at least on my end, to end with, as far as painting a very nuanced picture of very stark concepts, or very, very defined concepts.
I just want to thank everyone again for your participation and your time. I want to thank Sarah for making the time and coming on board. And I just typed an email, hey, sister, I've got this wacky idea. She's like, okay, what do I got to do? Just be there on the day. And this is the magic. And it's made possible by all of you. So it's just been the most wonderful experience. So raise of hands to Sarah. And thank you, Luis, for doing such a stellar job. Luis, I don't know if there's any housekeeping you want to wrap up with.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody that's here. Made it possible. And if you have questions, Rocco does have a podcast, and he has an AMA where he answers questions. So if you shoot questions,
and he has extraordinary clarity.
Yes, and he understands
Very
the question behind the question when you ask him things. So I encourage everybody to send questions his way and connect with Sarah as well on her socials.
If you have questions that you think it's going to be good for both Sarah and I to bounce off, I might be able to prevail on Sarah to join me on a podcast episode in the future. So I can always bank those episodes up and I'll reach out. And then maybe we can do an Ask Us Anything. And we can do a follow-up if there's any follow-up from this.
That would be great. Thank you, everybody.
And before everyone signs off, this is a piece of music that Luis wrote for this event.
Something more, something less.
And I'll make sure everyone gets a cut of this as well. But everyone, thank you so much.
Has arrived, you'll just be. Long before we wake, dreams of skies and seas we'll never touch, disconnected at times entwined. Think of all the lives we'll never live. just to fit. Scattered puzzles trying to become something more, something less, something other than what is when the time